Good morning, Sergeant Walsh.
Good morning, sir.
You told us you've been a ballistician for 15 years or so. Is that fair?
That's correct.
Okay. And in the course of that time, you've examined and taken apart hundreds, if not thousands, of firearms, right?
Taken apart? Probably no.
Okay. Well, you've examined.
Yes, sir.
Okay. And have you ever taken apart a firearm?
I have.
Okay. So you know the different parts of a firearm, right?
It's not my forte, but yes.
Okay. And are you a member of the Association of Firearm and Tool Mark Examiners?
No, I'm not.
Okay. Are you certified by the American Association of Firearm and Tool Mark Examiners?
I am not.
Okay. Now, but you have, you mentioned armor schools. You remember that?
Yes.
Okay. And you've attended a number of armor schools, right?
I have.
And in fact, one of the armor schools you completed was a Glock armor school, right?
Correct.
Okay. And you've also attended armor schools at other firearms manufacturers, right?
Typically, they send somebody out, but we don't typically go to the manufacturer.
All right. But
So,
whether
yes.
you come to them or they come to you, you've taken those courses, right?
Yes.
Okay. And specifically, you've taken one for Glock.
Yes.
Okay. And you've also taken tours of various firearm manufacturer facilities, have you not?
Yes.
Okay. Now, you talked some on direct examination about a Glock, right?
Correct.
Okay. Glock, that's G-L-O-C-K, right?
Correct.
And am I correct that Glock is an Austrian company that makes firearms?
Correct.
Okay. And it manufactures those firearms originally in Austria, and now it also has a manufacturing facility here in the United States in Georgia, right?
I'm not certain if they manufacture them in Georgia, but I believe they assemble the parts there, Smyrna,
Okay.
Georgia.
Okay. And do you agree with me that Glock is it's a very well-respected name in the firearms business?
Yes.
Okay. And in fact, many law enforcement agencies use Glocks and distribute them to their officers, right?
Yes.
And a Glock is well known in the industry as a precision instrument, right?
It's very well made. That's what you're getting at. I don't know about a precision, but
Okay.
it's very well
I guess
made.
that's what I'm getting at.
Mhm.
It's very well made.
Correct.
And it's made to exacting specifications, right?
Yes. Yes.
Now, you also discussed on direct examination a .45 caliber Glock, right?
Yes.
Okay. You were asked those questions by Mr. Bomberg a number of times about a .45 caliber Glock, right?
Yes.
And you answered that the ammunition, the casings and the bullets that you examined, you told us,
Yes.
were consistent with having been fired from a .45 caliber Glock, right?
Correct.
Okay. Now, in fact, Sergeant Walsh, there are a number of different .45 caliber Glock models, all of which use .45 caliber ammunition, right?
Correct.
Okay. Some of those models are large, and some of them are compact, right?
Correct.
Some of them are relatively fat and hold a wider or a larger magazine, and some are thin and only hold a 6-bullet magazine, right?
I don't know what the magazine capacity is, but yes, there's a subcompact Glock. I don't know for certain what the capacity is. I'll take your word for it.
Well, I don't want you to take my word for anything, Sergeant. Are you aware, as a ballistician, experienced ballistician, you have familiarity with a Glock model 36 .45 caliber weapon, which is so-called slimline with a capacity of it only holds 6 bullets in the magazine?
I'm not specifically aware of that model.
Okay. Well, are you aware of a, you know what I mean when I say a full-size Glock?
Sure, absolutely, sir.
Okay, and why don't you explain to the jury, what do I mean, or what do you mean, more importantly, by a full-size Glock, sir?
Well, Glock Say, for instance, are we talking Glock, any Glock or Glock 45?
Well, we're talking Glock 45 right
Okay.
now.
So say a model 21, it has a magazine, is a double-stack magazine, which means it has a live cartridge that holds more rounds. So it's a wider grip, so it allows to have more rounds. It has a wider grip, which allows a wider magazine, which allows more rounds. Typically, the slimline or something to that nature would be a sub-version of that model. So it has fewer rounds, but it's probably, because it has fewer rounds and smaller, it's easily concealable.
Okay. So, I'm not sure if you answered my question, though, Sergeant Walsh. What is a full-size Glock 45?
I don't have a definition for that.
Okay. But is a full-size Glock 45, it's bigger than a compact 45?
Correct.
Right?
I see where you're going, yes, sir.
And it's bigger than a slim frame 45, right?
Yes.
Okay. And
Excuse me.
so one of the models that you're familiar with of a full-size Glock 45 is Model 21, right?
Correct.
Okay. And in fact, there's more than one Model 21, isn't there?
Yes.
Okay. There's like a lot of manufacturers, Glock upgrades its lines from time to time, right?
Yes.
Okay. So, for example, there is a Generation 3, so-called Gen 3 Glock 21, right?
Yes.
And more recently, Glock put on the market a Generation 4, a Gen 4 Glock 21, right?
Correct.
That's two. And are you aware that Glock also manufactures and sells a Model 21 slim frame 45?
I was unaware of that.
Okay. Well, in addition to the Model 21, you are aware that there are other model Glock 45s, right?
Correct.
Okay. So, for example, are you aware that Glock sells a Model 41, which is a full-size Glock 45?
No.
Okay. Are you aware that Glock sells a Glock 30, which is a compact Glock 45 caliber weapon?
Yes.
Okay. And I'm not sure if you told us whether or not you're aware of the Glock Model 36, which is a slimline Glock 45.
No, I wasn't.
Okay. But you agree with me that there are a number of different models and sizes of Glock 45s, right?
Yes.
Okay. And all of those different models and sizes of Glock 45s all fire 45 caliber ammunition, right?
Yes.
They all fire the same kind of ammunition like the ammunition that you analyzed in this case, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Now, in addition to, by 45, because this is technical stuff, we're talking about the caliber of the ammunition that the gun fires, right?
Correct.
So when we talk about a Glock 45, we're talking about a weapon that fires 45 caliber ammunition, right?
Manufactured by Glock. Correct?
Right. When we're talking about a Glock 45, we're talking about a weapon manufactured by Glock that fires 45 caliber ammunition.
Correct.
Okay. And Glock sells firearms that fire other sizes of ammunition too, right?
Correct.
And some of those weapons that Glock sells are comparable in size to a full-size Glock 45, right?
I'm not certain.
Well, you're familiar with Glock Model 22, a full-size weapon which fires 40 caliber bullets?
Yes, I am.
Okay. And would you agree with me that a Model 22 is comparable in size to a Glock full-size 45 caliber weapon?
Yes.
Okay. Are you familiar with the Glock Model 31, a full-size weapon that fires .357 caliber ammunition?
Yes.
Okay. Would you agree with me that that particular model, the full-size Model 31, the .357, is comparable in size to a full-size Glock 45?
Yes.
Okay. You familiar with the Glock Model 20, a full-size Glock that fires 10 millimeter rounds?
No.
Okay. Are you familiar with the Glock Model 17, a full-size Glock that fires 9 millimeter rounds?
Yes.
Okay. Would you agree with me that the Model 17, that full-size Glock, 9 millimeter, is comparable in size to a full-size Glock 45?
I'm not sure.
Okay. Now,
Excuse me.
you testified on direct about something called rifling, right?
Yes.
Okay. And rifling is something that's it's observable inside the barrel of a gun, right?
Correct.
All right. So I want you and the jury to bear with me. We're going to talk about gun barrels, okay?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Now, would you agree with me, sir, that Glock manufactures its gun barrels in a different way than most other firearms manufacturers?
Than most, correct.
Okay. And I think you talked about that difference on direct, right?
Yes.
Okay. Because you told us that Glock uses a technique called polygonal rifling, right?
Correct.
Okay. And you explained to us that rifling is this pattern on the inside of the gun barrel which helps a bullet in flight to spin so it keeps a straight trajectory.
Correct. So it's accurate.
So it's accurate. Okay. So that's what rifling is in general, right?
Correct.
That pattern. Okay. But Glock uses a system called polygonal rifling, right?
Correct.
Okay. And more specifically, for its 45 caliber weapons, Glock specifically uses something called a octagonal rifling, right?
That's correct.
Okay. Octagonal means it's got eight twists in it, right?
8 lands and grooves.
Okay. Well, okay. It's got goes around 8 times.
Correct.
The bullet spins 8 times.
That's not what it means. I think you're correct. The octagonal is there are 8 lands and grooves imparted in there. from
Okay.
the Manufacturing.
All right. And that's why, so anytime you look at a projectile from a Glock 45, it's going to be 8, usually 8R for 8 right. Is that right?
Well, as long as the barrel wasn't switched out with something else. So as manufactured, yes.
All right. Well, in this case, the projectiles you looked at were all from the rifling system 8R, right?
Correct.
And that's a standard Glock rifling system.
The polygonal is the 8 right is not on all their calibers.
We're talking about Glock 45s
Okay,
right now,
sir.
sir. Okay?
Yes.
On Glock 45s, 8 right rifling is their standard rifling system, right?
I don't know for all 45s. For a particular model, yes.
Well, do you know of any Glock 45 that doesn't use 8R, sir?
I know that the Glock Model 21 does.
Do you know of
And the
any
30.
Glock Model 45s that use a rifling system other than octagonal 8R?
I'm not sure.
Okay. And am I correct that the way that Glock, as opposed to other manufacturers, makes its rifling inside the barrel, they use a process called cold hammer forged rifling, right?
Correct.
Okay. And you talked a little bit about that process on direct, didn't you?
Yes.
Okay. And am I correct that the way that works, making a gun barrel, is the barrel is drilled it's reamed, it's honed, and then a tool, which I think you told us is called a mandrel, is inserted into the unrifled barrel, right?
Correct.
Okay. Mandrel, that's M-A-N-D-R-E-L, right?
Yes.
Okay. And a mandrel, it's a steel plug tapered at each end, which has actually the opposite of the rifling profile on it, right?
Correct.
Okay. So that pattern is on this plug, this mandrel, which is stuck inside the barrel, right?
Correct.
Okay. And then, once that plug is stuck inside the barrel with the pattern on it, you said a device called a hammer forged is used, right?
Yes.
And what that is a whole bunch of mechanical hammers that hit the outside of the barrel to basically make that pattern imprint on the inside of the barrel, right?
That's correct.
Okay. That's what Glock does in making its gun barrels, right?
Correct.
Okay. And then after they do that, you know what else they do to their barrels after they've finished the hammer forge process?
I'm not exactly certain, but there's a proprietary finish they put on, an anti-rust chemical.
You know, where they then heat the barrels to relieve the stress on the metal caused by all that hammering, and then they bathe it in a chemical solution of potassium and sodium cyanide to put a hard finish on it. Is that
Correct. Yes,
right?
sir.
Okay. Now, what's so special and different about cold hammer forging is that it doesn't cut anything inside the barrel to produce the rifling pattern, right?
That's correct.
It compresses the metal to the desired shape around the mandrel instead.
Exactly.
And that process, that rather than cutting the inside of the barrel, compressing it around the mandrel to imprint the pattern, that leaves a smooth surface on the inside of the barrel, right?
Correct.
Right. And in fact, is the middle of the barrel, is that called the bore?
Yes.
Okay. And you can actually look down that barrel with a device called a bore scope and actually see what it looks like in there, right?
Correct.
Okay. You ever done that?
We do it all the time to count the rifling.
Okay. Now, am I correct that most other gun manufacturers use a different process, not the one we just talked about, not the cold hammer forging process that Glock uses, but a different process to add rifling to their gun barrels?
Correct.
Okay. And you describe that, I think, on direct as the standard or the cut process, right?
That's correct.
Okay. And that process that most manufacturers use involves the use of a cutting tool inside the barrel of the gun called a broach, right?
Correct.
Okay. And that cutting tool gets inserted into the barrel and makes a number of cuts, a number of lands and grooves into the inside of the barrel, right?
Correct.
It physically makes indentations in the metal, right?
Correct.
Let's see if we can just illustrate that.
Excuse me.
Show you a diagram, sir, and ask you if that fairly shows the difference between polygonal rifling and traditional or cut rifling.
Yes.
Okay. Your Honor, I would just ask to have this mark identification, use it as a chalk.
Maybe not for identification. Thank you.
So Sergeant Walsh, I'm showing you what's been marked as U for ID. So this shows, does it not, the polygonal rifling, that is what the inside of the barrel looks like, and the polygonal rifling, that is the Glock method over here, right, where it's relatively smooth on the inside, right?
That's correct.
And then over here, on the other side, we have, it's labeled traditional lands and grooves. That's the standard or cut approach, right?
Correct.
And on that one, am I correct, you can actually see these little cut marks into the metal of the barrel, which would produce those lands and grooves.
That's correct.
And when a bullet is fired through what you call a standard or a cut barrel, it produces a number of striations or lines on the bullet, right?
It produces the lands and grooves from the barrel.
Right. And those are the marks left by those cuts on the inside of the barrel, right?
Correct.
Okay. And in fact, it's those marks cut on the inside of the barrel, that's what you are comparing through your compound microscope when you try to compare projectiles with one another. Right?
It's not necessarily just the rifling, but it's the microscopic marks.
On the inside, from the inside of the barrel.
Correct.
Okay. Now, but Glock barrels are different because no cutting tool is used, right?
Correct.
Okay. So when a bullet is fired down a polygonal, cold hammer forged barrel of a Glock, as opposed to a cut barrel, the result is a smooth rifling impression with very light striations, right?
It's smooth, yes, correct.
Okay. And firing that bullet through that polygonally cold hammer fired Glock leaves few, if any, individual characteristics for comparison. Isn't that right, Sergeant Walsh?
Most times.
Yeah. Are you familiar with the FBI's general rifling characteristics, or GRC?
Yes.
Okay, tell us what that is, please.
It's a compilation developed by the FBI, which firearms examiners report the different land and groove widths and rifling of various types of firearms. So in essence, what you have is a very thick book of various calibers of firearms in which the examiners have test fired the bullets and then measured the lands and grooves, and they report that to the FBI.
So it's basically, is it not, kind of a database that you and your colleagues use as a guide as you do your work, right?
Yes.
Okay. And I'm correct, am I not, that under those FBI issued, and you use those, right?
Sure.
Okay. And you agree with me, would you not, that under those FBI issued general rifling characteristics, that firearms with polygonal rifling are not subject to comparison of projectiles. Isn't that right, Sergeant Walsh?
No.
You disagree with that?
I disagree with what you just said, sir.
Okay. You think that the FBI says that you can and should compare firearms with polygonal rifling? Is that your testimony, sir?
No, I don't think that's what the FBI is saying. I think the purpose of that FBI...
No, I'm asking you the purpose, sir. I'm asking you whether I'm correct that the general rifling characteristics of the FBI do not even include polygonal rifling because it is the position of the GRC or the general rifling characteristics, that firearms with polygonal rifling are not subject to comparison of projectiles. Isn't that the case, sir?
I object. Could I just be heard briefly there?
I'm going to try to rephrase the question. Would you agree with me, sir, that in the FBI General Rifling Characteristics, or GRC, firearms having polygonal rifling are not measurable and cannot be used to help identify any firearm other than to say that they are manufactured with polygonal rifling?
When you say not measurable, what do you mean, sir?
Not subject to individual comparisons, sir.
I disagree.
Okay. Well, would you agree with me, sir, that the absence of clearly identifiable markings or striations, whatever you want to call them, inside Glock barrels has been a well-recognized issue in the ballistician community for firearms examiners, such as yourself, for many years?
I agree.
And are you aware, sir, of some specific steps that Glock has undertaken over the past 10 or 15 years to address that problem, the problem caused by the inability to be able to, the lack of identifiable striations or markings inside polygonal barrels?
Yes?
Okay. So let's talk about those.
Certainly.
Now, are you aware, Sergeant Walsh, of something that Glock did in 2003 to address this problem at the behest of the Miami-Dade Police Department after there were several shootings by police officers involving Glocks?
Yes.
Okay. And why don't you tell us what Glock did in 2003?
Because police departments, specifically Miami-Dade, carry Glocks, and in the event that when police officers get involved in police shootings, when you have more than one officer shooting their Glock weapon, they had a hard time, the examiners had a hard time identifying the bullets from the Glock weapons. So they asked Glock to come up with a system to help make the bullets more identifiable so that they could determine which officer shot the individual. The system they came up with is called EBIS, E-B-I-S. It's Enhanced Bullet Identification System. And that was, I believe they put certain dots in the barrel in a certain way so that the combination was out to about 6,000 different firearms. So that it was unlikely that you would have two officers having the identical EBIS barrel next to each other. They try to distribute it that way. So that helps examiners make identifications of Glock bullets.
Okay. And that EBIS, EBIS, for Enhanced Bullet Identification System, is another word for the firearms that were made by Glock in response to that problem. The Miami barrel, is that it's referred to as
correct,
the Miami
sir.
barrel?
Yes.
All right, so if I say Miami barrel, you understand that's what I'm talking about?
Exactly.
Okay. And the Miami barrel, that used a cutting tool inside a number of Glocks for the purpose of trying to see if there was a way to make these comparisons of projectiles fired from Glocks easier, right?
Yes, I've actually seen those.
Okay. You've seen a Miami barrel?
I've actually looked at them. The test fires.
Okay. We're going to get to that too. Okay. So now these Miami barrels, the ones that were made with a cutting tool inside, that cutting tool was, by the way, that was you aware that was a finger-like cutting tool that was inserted into the barrel after the cold forge hammer process was all done to leave some marks that could be compared on the inside of the barrel?
Yes.
Okay. So it was like an extra step they were doing?
Correct.
Okay. So that projectiles fired through the Miami barrels could be compared with one another?
Correct.
Okay. And those were never sold to the public, right?
I'm not sure.
Okay. Well, in fact, they were only used in 9 millimeters, right, by Glock?
That's my understanding, yes.
Okay. They were never put in a 45, right?
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay. You don't know whether or not Glock ever sold these specially made cut barrels to the public?
Well, I think...
Do
I
you
don't
know, sir?
Whether Glock did personally or during resale.
Well, were they ever sold on the commercial market, or were they ever sold in gun stores to the general public, sir? If you know.
Well, I don't want to mislead with the question. Oftentimes police departments sell their guns when they trade their guns in, and those guns are resold. So it is possible those guns are out there.
Okay. But are you aware that in general, Glock made only a very small number of these Miami barrels, primarily for research purposes?
Yes.
Okay. And there were a number of research studies done between 2003 and 2012 or so, in which people such as yourself, either compared projectiles fired through these Miami barrels to see if this would work as a way of being able to compare Glock projectiles.
Yes.
Okay. And, in fact, were you ever part of any one of those research studies, Sergeant?
No, I was not, but I actually did see the bullets that were. I did not partake in the study.
Okay. And the reason you didn't partake in the study, that was a study where members of the Association of Firearms and Tool Mark Examiners were asked to, from all over the world, were asked, who worked for law enforcement agencies, were asked to participate in this research study by examining 10 test projectile bullets that had been fired through different Miami barrels to see if they could compare them, right?
Correct.
Okay. And you saw it because maybe someone else in your lab was doing that?
Exactly.
Okay. Now, are you aware of something that Glock has done more recently since this Miami barrel research was done in an effort to figure out a way to enable you and your colleagues to be able to compare projectiles or bullets fired through Glocks?
Yes, I know something, very little about it. I don't recall the name or what the process is, but there is an attempt.
Okay, let's talk about that. So have you ever heard of something called the Glock marking barrel, the
Yes.
GMB?
Yes.
Okay. Do you know what that is, sir?
I haven't seen one.
Okay. Do you know what it is?
No.
Okay. Do you know whether that is what Glock is currently using as a research tool in order to, as a way of trying to figure out a way to enable ballisticians to compare Glock fired bullets?
No.
Okay, you don't know anything about it?
Other than that they're working on it, I don't know the specifics beyond that.
Okay. But in any event, sir, you told us that the, do you know of any Glock 45 that's ever been available that has a standard cut barrel instead of a polygonally rifled cold hammer forged barrel, sir?
I don't know.
You don't know of any, right?
No.
Now, let's get to the work that you did in this case, sir. With respect to the bullets that you examined, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So, you examined these 4 bullets that were provided to you, right?
Yes.
Okay. And you determined that they were all in the same class, right?
The bullets?
Yes, sir.
Yes.
Okay. They were all in the polygonal rifling class, right?
No, I said they were in the .45 caliber class.
Okay, I'm sorry. They were in the .45 caliber class, but they all used polygonal rifling, right?
Yes.
All right. Class is not the right word to use with polygonal rifling?
Class is more geared towards the actual ammunition.
Okay.
So you may have a .45 with standard rifling, but it's still .45 caliber class.
All right. But they all had they all shared the characteristic of polygonal rifling, right?
Yes.
Okay. And that, you've told us, is a characteristic of Glocks, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Consistent with Glock.
Right. And let me just ask you about, let me just go back, before we do this, let me just ask you about the word comparison. Before we turn to what you specifically did in this case, I'd like you to look at that document. And does that appear to illustrate accurately the distinction between what a polygonally rifled bullet looks like after it's been fired, as opposed to a cut or standard rifle bullet after it's been fired?
That's fair.
I'd ask to mark this as a chalk, Your Honor. Okay.
Again, it's, chalk again is something used as an aid to you in, as you listen to the witness who's testifying, that unless it's marked as an exhibit, a numbered exhibit, you will not have it in the jury room.
And sorry, we talked about this, but I just want I want the jury to be able to just see what it looks like. So over here we have, this is what a polygonal bullet looks like after it's been fired, right? Correct. And you can, and then I'll take it around first. Okay, and then on the other side, we have what a cut barrel looks like, right? Correct. So when you did your comparisons, in this case, you found distinct striations on all four of those projectiles, didn't you?
Yes.
Okay. And in fact, and they matched up to each other, right?
Correct.
Okay. And in fact, they were pretty obvious, right?
Yes.
So let's put, you talked about this on direct examination, but this is Exhibit 218, which is a comparison of items 12.1 and 12.2. That was two of the projectiles that you examined, right?
Correct.
Okay. And that shows pretty clearly where I'm pointing at, as you explained, the striations on those two bullets, they pretty clearly match, right?
In my opinion, yes.
Yeah, okay. And a little closer, a little bit. There are distinct striations, or marks, and they match, right?
Correct.
And show you the other two that you looked at were 29.1 and 29.2. It's the red line in the middle that separates the two of them?
It's on the left. That the red line is the area. It'd be this right here. That's separating. The black line.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
But they quite clearly match, right?
Yes.
Okay. They're very distinctive markings, and they match.
Correct.
Right?
Correct.
And by the way, somebody other than you looked at those bullets, right?
Correct.
Okay. After you did your comparison, somebody else checked your work or reviewed your work, right?
Verified it. Correct.
Okay. And who was that?
John Conroy, Sergeant John Conroy.
Okay. He's another sergeant in your unit?
Yes, you had him earlier.
We had, I mean, he was a witness here earlier?
Yes, sir.
Okay. You knew about that?
I knew that he was testifying.
Okay. And he confirmed the conclusions that you reached, right?
Correct.
Now, Sergeant Walsh is someone who's been doing this for quite a while. When you look through that, you had already determined that you believed the casings were consistent with having been fired by a Glock, right?
I don't understand the question.
Well, I think you told us on direct, the first thing you looked at was the casings, right?
Oh, right.
Right?
I don't recall if it was the first thing, but I did look at the casings.
Okay. And based on looking at the casings, you said they were consistent with being fired by a Glock.
Correct.
Okay. And so as you are now going to look at the projectiles, and you knew the casings were 45, right?
Correct.
Okay. So you had in your mind that if the projectiles matched the casings, that they would be consistent with a 45 Glock, right?
I don't understand the question.
All right. Well, you concluded the casings were consistent with a 45 Glock.
Correct.
All right. And now you're looking at the projectiles, right?
Yes.
Okay. So when you look at the projectiles and you saw these distinct markings or striations on those projectiles, you knew
Yes.
because Glock 45s aren't made with cuts on the inside of the barrel that leaves those distinct markings, right?
That's correct.
You knew, Sergeant Walsh, did you not, that if a Glock 45 fired those bullets, that was no ordinary Glock 45, didn't you?
I don't understand that question.
Well, it had distinct striations, unlike what you would normally find in a bullet fired through a Glock, right?
Correct.
You knew, did you not, sir, that this had to be one of those specially manufactured Glocks, the ones they had made to try to deal with this problem, which had added cuts to the polygonal rifling during the manufacture process. You
No.
knew that, right?
No.
Well, you certainly had some idea that that was a very high probability, didn't you, Sergeant Walsh?
No.
Never occurred to you that I'm not looking at a normal Glock bullet, I'm looking at a bullet that's got clear striations, and therefore there's something special and different about it? That never occurred to you, sir?
What occurred to me was that I was able to ID those projectiles, and it was from polygonal rifling, which is unusual. But I didn't consider the source beyond that because I didn't have anything to check it against.
Didn't have anything to check it against. Is that your testimony, sir?
Correct. I didn't have any test fires.
Well, sir, you knew that Glock had manufactured a limited number of firearms with a special tool to address the problem in your community of the inability to match up Glock projectiles, right? You knew that.
Are you talking about the EBIS barrels?
Well, the EBIS barrels or this new system that you don't seem to know anything about or something that Glock has done in order to address this issue.
I object to the phone.
One question.
Did it occur to you, sir, that this was not an ordinary Glock that had fired those bullets?
No, it didn't occur to me that it was. It occurred to me that I was able to ID
No, you
the
answered my
bullets.
question. Thank you. Did it occur to you to contact Glock and find out whether they had produced some 45s that maybe you didn't know about that had cuts inside the polygonal rifling barrel so they could help you out? Did that occur to you?
No.
Am I correct? There's a database, a national database for comparing projectiles called Bullet Track?
There is?
Okay. That's part of the National Integrated Ballistic Information System run by the feds?
Yes.
NIBIN?
NIBIN, yes, sir.
NIBIN is the acronym, right?
Yes, sir?
Okay. Did you access that database?
Nope.
Have you ever purchased a Glock?
No.
Have you ever seen a new Glock in a box?
I must have.
Are you aware that all new Glocks are sold with 2 test-fired casings inside the box?
I believe I am, yes.
Okay. Did you ever think about contacting Glock to find out whether anybody had purchased some special .45 with a cut barrel to see if those casings could be, that you had, could be matched to some casings sitting in some box somewhere?
I didn't think that barrel was cut.
You didn't think that barrel was cut?
No, I think it's
Okay.
the projectiles are polygonal.
Okay. So it's your testimony, sir, that this particular Glock 45 that fired these particular bullets, cold hammer forged barrel with polygonal rifling, somehow produced distinct markings or striations on the projectile so you could compare them. Is that your testimony?
Yes.
You agree with me, those striations are obvious, aren't they?
Yes.
And you don't think they're cut?
I don't know how they were created.
Right. Now, sir, you did a report that documented the work you did in this case, right?
Yes.
Okay. And there's nothing in your report that makes reference to how unusual it is to see striations on a bullet fired through a polygonal rifling system, is there?
Correct.
Does that seem important to you, sir?
Not necessarily.
Didn't seem important enough to include it in your report?
No.
Were you trying to hide that information, sir?
No.
I have no further questions.
I suppose if you were trying to hide it, you wouldn't have taken photographs, right?
I wasn't trying to hide it.
Right, you put them on the microscope right next to each other and then photographed them at the very time that you were making the observations, and you turned it over to everybody who wanted it, right?
Correct.
So, it's clear you weren't trying to hide anything, isn't it, Sergeant?
Jack's leading.
Well, these questions now that Mr. Sultan is asking you solely focused on the markings of projectiles, correct?
Correct.
And this sort of rifling system, and whether or not it's designed to leave behind anomalies that make striations, is just particular to the barrel, is that correct?
Correct.
As to the chamber of the weapon in the breech face, there's no issue about Glock's markings there, correct?
No.
And so, just making the physical observations of the projectiles, or strike that, the shell casings, when you first make the physical examination of them, you make those observations that it's a Glock 45, correct?
Based on the firing pin aperture and the circular fire, the elliptical firing pin.
Now, believe when Mr. Sultan was asking you about these Miami barrels, Mr. Sultan himself indicated to you what caliber those Miami barrels were in, correct?
Correct.
And when Mr. Sultan is asking you about the EBIS barrel, that is the Miami barrel. Is that not correct?
That's correct.
And it's fair to say you could have never considered whether or not this projectile had been fired by the EBIS barrel because it's the wrong caliber. True?
That's correct.
And in fact, as Mr. Sultan pointed out to you, and as you were aware, the EBIS barrel was in 9mm, correct?
To the best of my knowledge, yes.
And is it fair to say that a .45 caliber projectile cannot be fired in the barrel of a 9mm weapon?
That's correct.
Would there be a problem created by chambering a .45 caliber round into a 9mm weapon?
It wouldn't chamber. It wouldn't fit.
Couldn't do it.
Correct.
And so, whether or not to consider the idea that the Miami barrel was used to fire these 4 projectiles, you didn't have to do that because it was impossible. Is that not true?
That's correct.
And so, when Mr. Sultan asked you about the FBI GRC, I believe you began to answer him. Is that correct?
Yes.
And could you tell us what it was that you were trying to explain to Mr. Sultan about the FBI GRC, please?
I was trying to explain that I think there was a misunderstanding as far as the FBI GRC doesn't dictate whether or not you should compare bullets or what the ability of what's on the bullet to compare it. I think the issue is when you look at the FBI GRC, it has, again, the lands and grooves and their measurements. So when you have an unknown bullet at a scene and you bring it back to the lab and you can measure the land and groove width, you then compare it to this database, as Mr. Sultan said, and you can narrow down possible candidate bullets that fired it. The FBI GRC, it does mention the Glock R8, right twist 8. However, because the polygonal rifling doesn't permit that standard cut rifling, it's very difficult to get a measurement on the bullet. So the potential is there that you'll have a wrong measurement. So if you look at the GRC, it gives you 0000. I don't think its intent, and I can't believe the FBI would ever endorse not examining bullets from a crime scene.
Meaning, it's difficult to measure the exact width of the lands and grooves as they relate to each other. Is that correct?
Correct.
And because they are so subtle in the transformation from being a land to being a groove.
Exactly. It doesn't have clear shoulders, which would be the cut in the groove.
And so it's just on when the FBI GRC talks about that, it's just on the measuring, not on the process of comparing. Is that correct?
Correct.
And now Mr. Sultan is asking you about striations on projectiles, correct?
Correct.
And he's asked you about striations being caused by a cut barrel.
Correct.
In particular. Now, when you're looking to compare, strike that, a cut barrel is simply a class characteristic. Is that correct?
Yes.
And it's fair to say when you're comparing projectiles against each other at the microscopic level now to see if they've been fired from the same weapon, you're not concerning yourself with the class characteristics because you only compare projectiles that have the same class characteristics to begin with. Is that true?
Correct.
And so, is it fair to say you're not looking at those characteristics, the cut barrel characteristics, when you're comparing them to each other? You're looking for imperfections. Is that correct?
Correct.
Things that weren't designed in the manufacturing process, but anomalies as to that particular barrel. Is that true?
Correct.
And is it fair to say that anomalies that you're looking, so when you're looking at polygonally fired projectiles, or projectiles that have been fired out of a polygonally rifled weapon. You're not now at the microscopic level looking to compare the class characteristics. You're looking to see if there's an anomaly in there that caused striations, correct?
From two polygonal bullets?
Correct.
Correct.
It's the anomaly that you're looking for.
Correct.
And it can't be the anomaly of an EBIS barrel that fired those 4 projectiles, correct?
Correct.
So it's some other anomaly. Is that true?
That's true.
And I believe you described test firing. What is test firing, please? You mentioned test firing.
Test fire is when you load a suspect weapon or a weapon that you want to make sure it works. You put live ammunition in it, and we shoot it into a water tank or into cotton.
And that requires an actual firearm in order to do that, correct?
Correct.
A recovered firearm, correct?
Correct.
Now, based on your observations of the 5 shell casings, both first at the class characteristics and then at the microscopic level, you formed the opinion that you've already explained to this jury, correct?
Yes.
And based on first initially looking at the 4 projectiles, you formed the opinion as to whether or not those 4 projectiles were fired by a Glock 45 caliber. First, is that correct?
Repeat the question?
I apologize. Just the physical examination, before you ever did any microscopic examination, the first physical examination that led you to the conclusion, or your opinion, to a reasonable degree of ballistic certainty that those projectiles were fired by a 45 caliber Glock handgun. True?
Consistent with.
Consistent. And it was only then that you moved on to the microscopic examination, correct?
Yes.
And what was the purpose of moving on to the microscopic examination, please?
To determine whether the 4 projectiles were fired or not fired, or some were, some weren't, from the same unknown weapon.
Meaning, when you looked at them then at the microscopic level, if you didn't find sufficient microscopic evidence to draw a conclusion, you could draw no conclusion, correct?
It would be inconclusive.
If you found, and it's fair to say you didn't know what you would find before you started looking at them at the microscopic level, true?
Correct.
If you looked at them and you found evidence that the projectiles at the microscopic level, as you've described in your photographs here, matched, then what would your conclusion be?
That they were fired from the same unknown weapon.
And if you looked at them now on June 19th of 2013, and at the microscopic level, those projectiles didn't match, what would that have meant to you?
That they are inconclusive.
And what if they had microscopic evidence that contradicted each other? What would that have meant?
If it was significant enough, I would say they were 2 different weapons.
And when you started your examination, did you know what you were going to find?
No.
And if they had been from, hadn't matched, and they had been from more than one weapon, that wouldn't have had any impact at all.
I object to the
Is that fair to say?
Objection to this formal question. Please sustain.
Nothing further.
President Walsh, you were just asked on redirect examination about an anomaly, right? Remember that word?
Yes.
Okay. By the way, that wasn't your word. That was Mr. Baumann, right?
Correct.
All right. Now, looking again at, we'll start with this one. This is 218. This is the matching of 2 of the bullets, right?
Yes.
Do you agree with me there's a clear pattern of striations on both of those, readily observable
Yes,
on both of those bullets.
I agree, sir.
And Mr. Bomber didn't ask you about the Glock marking barrel. Are you telling us that you don't know anything about the Glock marking barrel, sir?
I don't know much about it. I haven't seen one.
Do you know that it is refers to specially made firearms by Glock over the past several years, 45 caliber, to address this very issue of the difficulty or impossibility of matching or comparing projectiles fired through Glocks?
I object.
Same form of the question.
What do you know about Glock marking barrels, sir?
Not much.
Do you know whether it is a program by Glock, a recent program, an ongoing program, to address this issue?
I know that there is an issue with the Glock bullets marking, and I know that Glock is doing something. Beyond that, I don't know what they've done. I don't know if they've hit the market, anything like that.
You don't know whether the Glock marking barrel is a program instituted by Glock to address that issue?
I think I object.
It's the same. Asking.
That's all I have.
Nothing. Thank
You
you.
may sit down.
Thank you, Your Honor. Thank you, jury.
Your Honor, I'd call Vanessa Sanchez, please.
solemnly swear your testimony will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God.
Yes, I do.
Good afternoon, ma'am.
Good
State your
afternoon.
full name, please.
Vanessa Sanchez,
How do you spell your last name?
Sanchez,
And how old are you?
26,
Where do you live?
157 Pond Street in Pawtucket, Rhode Island.
How long have you lived there?
Over 5 years.
Do you have a boyfriend?
Yes.
What is his name?
Eduardo Sandoval.
Okay. And does he live with you?
Yes.
Okay. And just directing your attention back to June of 2000, June 16th, Father's Day of 2013. Do you remember that date?
Yes.
And ma'am, do you recall at some time in the evening, the late evening, going somewhere?
Yes.
Where did you go?
South Street Cafe.
And where's the South Street Cafe?
In Providence.
Okay. Is it on South Street?
Terrible with streets. Could be on South Street.
Okay. Is that in the downtown area or some other part of the city?
Near the downtown area.
And when you went, did you go to that location sometime in the late evening hours?
Yes.
What time did you arrive there?
We arrived pretty late. I'm not sure exactly the specific time. Maybe like around 9 or after.
Okay. How long did you remain there?
Maybe an hour or so.
Okay. When you arrived, well, who did you go with?
My boyfriend.
And your boyfriend, Eduardo Sandoval?
Yes.
And when you arrived there, did you meet with anybody?
Yes.
Who did you meet with?
Robbie, Eddie's cousin, Nellie, his girlfriend, and Aaron and his fiance.
Okay. And when you say Robbie, who's Robbie?
My boyfriend's cousin.
And is that Roberto Oliveras?
Yes.
And you said his girlfriend, Nellie?
Yes.
Do you know her full name?
Nareda, I believe.
I'm sorry, Nareda?
We
You don't-
call her Nellie, so,
Okay. And you said Aaron,
yes.
and who's Aaron?
Aaron Hernandez,
Okay. And do you see Aaron Hernandez in the courtroom today?
yes.
Could you just point him out and describe what he's wearing?
A blue tie with, I think, gray, a white button-up collared shirt, and a black jacket.
And Your Honor, the record can reflect identification of the defendant.
Okay.
Now, was he with anybody, the defendant, Aaron Hernandez?
His fiance,
And do you know what her name is?
Shiana Jackson?
Had you ever met either the defendant or Shiana Jenkins before that night?
No.
And just tell us, when you arrived there, where did you see the defendant and Shiana Jenkins and Roberto, or Robbie and Nellie?
Everyone was sitting already at the table?
Did you join them at the table?
Yes.
And what about Eddie, your boyfriend?
Yes.
Just tell us, how long were you in the company of the defendant?
Maybe for like an hour.
Okay. And during that time, what was happening?
There were drinks. They were just kind of talking about kids, like our kids. We all have kids.
Okay. When you say drinks, were you drinking?
I'm not really much of a alcohol drinker, so I think I might have had a soda or something.
Okay. Did you see anybody else drinking?
I believe everyone else was drinking.
Okay. Do you know what they were drinking?
No.
And during the course of that hour, was anything unusual going on?
No.
Now, at some point, do you recall, well, let me ask you this, Robbie, where does he live?
In Central Falls.
Okay. And how far is Central Falls from Providence?
Maybe like 10, 15 minutes away.
Okay. And during the time now, as the time passes, it's sometime after about an hour, does anybody leave?
Aaron and his fiance left first.
Did they say anything about leaving?
I think they just had to go to their kids, I don't know, to their daughter.
Okay. And so, as a result of that, did they end up leaving?
Yes.
And approximately what time was that?
Maybe like around 12 or before, I'm not sure.
And prior to leaving, did the group of you do anything together?
We took a picture.
Okay. And when you say we took a picture of, who took a picture?
I'm not sure exactly who took the picture. Someone at the bar took the picture.
Your Honor, if I could approach. Ma'am, I'm just going to show you what was marked L for identification. Ask you if you recognize that picture.
Yes.
And what do you recognize that picture as?
Just a picture of us, our outing that night.
I'm sorry, at the outing?
Yes.
That night? Okay. And does that include everybody who was in your group?
Yes.
Your Honor, I'd offer this as the next exhibit.
No objection, Your Honor.
And mark as the next exhibit.
Ma'am, I'm just going to show you what's also been marked M for identification. Just ask you if you recognize that picture as a closer-up of what's now been marked 223.
Yes.
Okay. And Your Honor, I'd offer this as well.
No objection, Your Honor.
And mark as the next exhibit.
I could publish these on the Ma'am, I'm placing what's now marked formally self-identification of 223. Is that the photograph of all of you at the South Street Cafe?
Yes.
And was that just before you left? Sorry.
That was before Aaron and his fiance left.
Okay. You indicated your best memory was around midnight?
Yes.
And how long did you remain at the South Street Cafe after that?
Not too long. They were closing, so, I don't know, maybe like 15 minutes after we left.
Okay. And just with regard to the photo, starting on the left here, I'm just going to ask you to identify. Who is this?
Shiana,
Okay.
Aaron, Eddie, me, Nellie, Robbie.
And is that how the defendant, Aaron Hernandez, appeared that evening?
Yes.
I showed you a second photograph. Now, formerly M, now 224. Is it 224? And that, recognize that as a close-up.
Yes.
Now, after that 15 minutes or so, that you believe you left, where did you go?
Me and Eddie went together, so we went home.
Okay, and home at that time, was that Pawtucket?
Yes.
Okay, and what about Roberto Oliveras? Where,
I'm assuming they went home as well. I'm not sure.
and at that time, where was he living?
I believe Central Falls.
Okay, and what, was Nellie living with him as well?
I'm not sure.
Okay. I got a moment now. Just, you indicated that Eduardo or Sandoval, or Eddie, your boyfriend, is the cousin of who?
Eddie is cousins with Robbie.
Okay. And what does Robbie or Roberto Oliveras do for a living?
It's a barber.
Thank you. I have nothing further.
Good morning, Ms. Sanchez.
Good morning.
I've placed on the video screen Exhibit 223. And I believe you testified on direct examination that this is a photograph of your group at the South Street Cafe on Sunday, June 16th, Father's Day.
Yes.
Now, you've described that to us today, and you've had an opportunity to describe that night on previous occasions, haven't you?
Yes.
On October 10th, 2013, you were interviewed by the police, weren't you?
Yes.
And two police officers, one named Benson and one named Arigi, came to see you,
Yes.
and they put you in a police car.
Yes.
Where did you sit in that police car?
In a Target parking lot.
Where particularly, Ms.
Where?
Sanchez, in the car were you sitting?
In the front passenger side.
And that was recorded, is that correct?
Yes.
And you told them about that night with Aaron and Cheyenne and Robbie and Nellie and Eduardo at the South Street Cafe, correct?
Correct.
And in fact, I think they showed you this picture, didn't they?
Yes.
And they asked you to sign this picture,
Yes.
and you signed it.
Yes.
Now, on that Sunday, you mentioned on direct examination, you got there, you and Eddie got there late.
Yes.
And by late, we mean later in the evening, more towards closing time, is that correct?
Yes.
And you were there for approximately an hour before you left.
you got there late in another respect, too, in that Aaron and Cheyenne and Robbie and Nellie were already there.
Correct.
And when you arrived, was that group sitting out in the open and sitting in the restaurant like other patrons?
Yes.
They weren't shut away in some private room.
No.
And when you arrived, I think you mentioned that you'd never met Aaron or Cheyenne before. Is that right?
Correct.
And was Aaron friendly to you?
Yes.
And was Aaron friendly to everyone else who was there?
Yes.
In fact, would you say people were having a good time?
Yes.
People were, the group was having some drinks?
Yes. Yes.
The group was having some food?
No. When I was there, I didn't notice any food.
Okay. But the group was talking to each other?
Yes.
And the group was sort of laughing and enjoying themselves?
Yes.
At some point, Aaron arranged a toast, didn't he?
Yes.
And Aaron bought drinks or shots for everyone at the table. Is that right?
Yes.
And then Aaron proposed a toast, didn't he?
Yes.
And he proposed a toast to Father's Day.
Yes.
And I think you mentioned that there was a fair amount of discussion about kids at the table that night.
Correct.
And Aaron was talking about his child, AVL.
Yes.
And did Aaron also mention during that night that he was planning on getting married to Cheyenne?
Yes.
And he talked about possible future kids, right?
Well, overruled, it's not being introduced for the truth of what he may have said as to what was said to him, but for his state of mind.
And so did you join in that toast too?
Yes.
Now, at some point you mentioned that Aaron and Cheyenne left. Is that right?
Yes.
And you estimated that that was around midnight.
Yes.
And before he left, Aaron paid the bill, didn't he?
Yes.
And of firearms or guns?
No.
You never heard anyone else say that Aaron had a gun or possessed a firearm?
No.
You never heard any discussion about Aaron and Robbie having gone to a nightclub on Friday night?
No.
I'm sorry, you never heard any discussion about Aaron and Robbie having gone to a nightclub on Friday night?
No.
And basically there were no arguments or disagreements. It was a fun time, correct?
Correct.
Now, this isn't the first time you've been to this courthouse, is it, on this case?
No.
And you are a resident of Rhode Island, correct?
Correct.
So the prosecutors issued a subpoena to compel your testimony here. Isn't that right?
Yes.
At trial.
Yes.
They never called you before the grand jury that indicted Aaron, did they?
They did call me several times.
They never asked you to testify in front of the grand jury that indicted Aaron, did they?
No.
So you were subpoenaed to come here, and do you remember the first time that you came here for trial?
A few weeks ago?
A few weeks ago. And on that day, were you brought into a courtroom and did you appear before a judge?
No.
Where did you go?
I met in an office, a little room downstairs.
You met in the DA and police office on the first floor.
It's on the first floor to the right.
To the right as you come in.
Yes.
And how long were you kept there?
for some hours.
How many?
Maybe like 4 hours. I'm not sure exactly how long, but it was a while.
But you never came and testified at a trial that day.
No.
But did you speak to the police and the prosecutors?
Yes.
Did they conduct an interview with you?
Yes.
And did they do that alone? You were alone with them?
Yes.
And you told them the same information you told us today, is that correct?
Correct.
And then you came back a subsequent time for this trial?
No.
You weren't
Well,
here
today.
yesterday?
No.
You came today?
Yes.
And when you came today, were you told that you would testify in court today?
Yes.
And you were brought into the courtroom and you appeared before a judge, is that right?
Yes.
But that didn't happen a few weeks ago when they called you to the courtroom, did it?
No.
They brought you into their office and kept you there for at least 4 hours.
Yes.
No further questions. Thank you, Ms. Sanchez.
Ma'am, did you tell anything different when you met before than you've told this jury today?
No.
And when Mr. Fee asked you about, did you hear this or hear that the night at the South Street Cafe, did the defendant, Aaron Hernandez, tell you he was going somewhere later that night?
No.
Did you actually have much conversation with him at all?
No.
Who were you speaking with?
That night, I was mostly speaking with Eddie.
Okay. You had never met him before?
No.
And the gathering that brought you there, was this something that had been planned before that night?
That I know of,
Just that
I
you know?
found out that night.
Okay. What time did you find out? How long before you ended up going?
Maybe like a couple of hours before, couple or few hours before.
Okay. And so that would have been sometime in the evening?
Yes.
Approximately what time, if you remember?
Maybe like 7 or after 7 maybe.
Okay. And you'd only arrived there, it's your best memory, it was that you were there about an hour.
Yes.
And when you saw, and you left at approximately 12:15, 15 minutes after the defendant left around midnight.
Yes.
So an hour before that would have been around 11:15 is when you would have arrived.
Maybe.
And Mr. Fee asked you about the seating arrangement. It was out in the open, is that true?
Yes.
You could see other patrons?
Yes.
Other patrons presumably had a line of sight on, could see you.
Yes.
The bar area, was that open to where you were sitting?
Yes.
And there was wait staff that came and went to the table for drinks or the like, is that true?
Yes.
And at the end, I think Mr. Fee said that Aaron Hernandez, the defendant, used a credit card to pay for everything. Objection.
There was the words credit card whenever you were
I'm sorry.
mischaracterizing the question.
I'm sorry. Did Mr. Fee ask you who paid for everything at the end?
Yes.
Who paid?
I believe it was Aaron.
And did you see how he paid?
No.
And just with regard to, when Mr. Fee asked you about, did you ever meet with the police initially? This is, well over a year ago, is that true?
Yes.
I'm sorry, the first occasion that you spoke to the police.
Was it over a year?
But just when, what is the date that you had mentioned to him?
I don't have an exact date.
Okay.
I met a while ago in the car.
Yes.
And then I met maybe like a few weeks ago.
Right.
Again here.
Okay, I want to ask you first about the car. Where did you meet in the car?
In a Target parking lot in North Attleboro, Mass.
Okay, and what caused you to be in the Target parking lot of North Attleboro, Massachusetts?
I was shopping at Target with
And
my
so
family.
how was it that the police learned or came to speak to you at that location?
They had called me. They
Okay.
told me to meet them outside.
Okay, and when you spoke to them, did you agree to meet with them?
Yes.
Okay. So there was nothing, and they spoke to you for some period of time,
Yes.
and there was nothing that was, obviously the situation, police speaking, might be unusual, but outside of having a conversation with the police, was there anything else that was unusual about that?
No.
And during the course, Mr. Fee asked you about how the defendant, Aaron Hernandez, appeared during the time, that hour, 45 minutes roughly, that you were with him. Do you remember him having a phone?
Objection beyond the scope.
Sustained.
Well, you made observations of him, right?
Objection.
Yes.
Sustained. Beyond the scope.
Okay. Mr. Fee asked you about how you, your observations of him. Did he not?
Objection. Mischaracterizing the question.
Sustained.
You had no conversations with him?
No.
Objection.
I have nothing further, Your Honor. Thank you.
Nothing further, Your Honor. Thank you, Ms. Sanchez.
You may sit down. We're going to stop at this point for the day. Please keep an open mind. Continue to avoid anything about the case or Mr. Hernandez that might appear in any newspaper or television or any other media or Facebook, Twitter, or any form of social media. Please continue to avoid speaking or emailing or texting or otherwise communicating in any form with anyone, including each other, about the case or Mr. Hernandez. If anyone starts any kind of communication with you, please, about your jury service or Mr. Hernandez or this case, please end it immediately. Please do not do any research about the case, Mr. Hernandez, or anything that you think might in any way be relevant to the case.
Would all rise? Hear ye, hear ye, hear ye. All persons having anything further to do before the Honorable, the Justice E. Susan Gosh of the Superior Court, now sitting at Fall River within and for the Commonwealth, depart and give your attendance here tomorrow morning at 9 a.m., to which time and place the sitting of this court is now adjourned. God save the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. Court is now adjourned.